The stallion stood at the far end of the pasture, black as midnight, watching me with eyes that seemed to hold every ounce of grief I'd been carrying since the funeral. The lawyer had warned me. The neighbors had warned me. Even my late husband's best friend had pulled me aside at the wake and said, "Delia, whatever you do, don't go near that horse." But I'd inherited more than just land that autumn. I'd inherited a promise I didn't know my husband had made. And standing there in the Montana wind, my city heels sinking into mud I had no business walking through, I realized that sometimes the things everyone warns you about are exactly the things you need most. This is the story of how I lost everything I thought mattered and found everything I didn't know I needed. Before I tell you what happened between me and that horse, and trust me, you won't believe how this unfolds, I need to know something. Have you ever inherited something that completely changed your life? Not just furniture or money, but something that forced you to become someone you never imagined you could be. Drop a comment and tell me what it was. And while you're down there, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets wild. Also, tell me what city you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are in the world. All right, let me take you back to where this really began. September 2 years ago, when my entire world collapsed in a hospital room in Seattle. My husband's name was Philip Garrett Morrison, though everyone called him Phil. He died on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Tuesdays are supposed to be unremarkable, the forgettable middle children of the week. But now every Tuesday feels like an anniversary of loss. We'd been married for 22 years, met in college, both studying architecture, both believing we'd design buildings that would outlast us. We did design them, actually. 3 shopping centers, an office complex in Portland, a library in Spokane that won an award neither of us cared about. But somewhere in all that designing of permanent structures, we forgot to build anything permanent between us. I don't mean we didn't love each other, we did. But it was the kind of love that exists in the comfortable silences of Sunday mornings, in the routine of coffee made just so, in the unspoken agreement that our work was our passion and our marriage was our foundation. Steady, reliable, boring, if I'm honest. Phil never mentioned Montana, not once in 22 years. So you can imagine my shock when his lawyer, a man named Bernard with kind eyes and a terrible comb-over, sat me down in his office 3 days after the funeral and slid a deed across his desk. "Philip owned property in Montana," Bernard said, watching my face carefully. 40 acres outside a town called Willowbrook. He inherited it from his uncle about 15 years ago. I stared at the paper. The words blurred. 15 years? He never mentioned it? Never. Bernard cleared his throat. "There's a house, a barn, some equipment, and—" He paused, which should have been my first warning. "And a horse." The way he said horse made it sound like he was saying problem or curse or lawsuit waiting to happen. "I don't know anything about horses," I said. Neither did Philip, apparently. But the property manager, a man named Declan who lives in town, has been caring for the animal for years. Philip paid him monthly. The arrangement was that the horse would stay there for its lifetime. What kind of horse needs a lifetime arrangement? Bernard opened a folder and pulled out a photograph. Even in the faded picture, the stallion was magnificent. Pure black, with a white star on his forehead and eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. "His name is Sorrow," Bernard said. "And according to Declan, he's dangerous. Hasn't let anyone touch him in almost 10 years. Philip visited exactly once, about 6 months ago. Declan said it didn't go well. 6 months ago, right before Phil got his diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, the kind that gives you weeks instead of years. Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. Bernard closed the folder. "I don't know, Delia, but the property is yours now. You can sell it, keep it, whatever you want. Though I should mention—" He pulled out another document. "Philip set up a trust specifically for the horse's care. $50,000. It can only be used for Sorrow's needs. Food, vet care, boarding. $50,000. For a horse my husband never told me about. I took the deed. I took the photograph. I took the keys Bernard handed me, even though I had no intention of ever going to Montana. I lasted 3 weeks. Seattle felt wrong after Phil died. Our apartment, the one we'd carefully designed with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture that cost more than my first car, felt like a museum dedicated to a life I no longer recognized. His coffee mug still sat by the sink. His reading glasses were folded on the nightstand. His architecture books lined the shelves like tombstones. I couldn't throw anything away, but I couldn't stay either. So on a grey October morning, I loaded my car with clothes I'd never worn to a ranch, downloaded a map to Willowbrook, Montana, and drove east, away from the ocean, away from the city, away from everyone who looked at me with pity and whispered, "Poor Delia, all alone now." The drive took 2 days. I stopped in Missoula the first night, stayed in a motel that smelled like cigarettes and regret, and lay awake wondering what the hell I was doing. I was a 51-year-old architect who wore designer jeans and got anxiety in nature. What was I going to do with 40 acres and a dangerous horse? But I kept driving. Willowbrook wasn't even a town, really. More like an idea of a town. One main street with a post office, a diner called the Brass Skillet, a feed store and a bar with a neon sign that flickered like it was considering giving up. Population, 342, according to a sign someone had amended with spray paint to read 342 and shrinking. The property was 6 miles outside town, down a dirt road that my sedan was absolutely not designed for. I bottomed out twice, cursed Phil's name both times, and nearly turned around. Then I saw it. The house was small, a cabin really, built from logs that had weathered to silver grey. A porch wrapped around the front, sagging slightly on one side. The windows were intact, but dirty. Behind it stood a red barn that had seen better decades, and beyond that, pasture rolled out toward mountains that looked like they'd been painted onto the horizon. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was everything our Seattle apartment wasn't. I parked and sat there for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. A truck pulled up beside me, old blue, held together by rust and determination. The man who climbed out was probably in his 60s, lean and weathered like the fence posts, with a grey beard and eyes the colour of faded denim. "You must be Delia," he said. Not a question. "Declan," he nodded. "Didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I." He studied me for a moment, my impractical clothes, my city pallor, my obvious discomfort. "You want to see inside?" The cabin was dusty but sound. 1 bedroom, a kitchen with appliances from the 70s, a living room with a stone fireplace that still held old ashes. It smelled like wood and time and secrets. "Phil came here once," Declan said, standing in the doorway. "Back in March. Stayed one night. He stood out in that pasture for hours, just watching sorrow, never got close. Left the next morning and told me to keep things going as they were." "Did he say why he came?" "No, but he looked at that horse like—" Declan trailed off, searching for words, like he was looking at something he'd lost, or something he'd never had. We walked to the barn. The building was bigger than it looked from the road, with stalls that hadn't held horses in years and equipment I couldn't identify. Everything was clean, though, maintained. Declan clearly took his job seriously. "Sorrow's out in the back pasture," Declan said. "He doesn't like the barn, hasn't been inside it in 9 years. What happened 9 years ago?" Declan's expression darkened. "That's when the last person tried to break him." We walked through the barn and out the back door, and that's when I saw him. Sorrow stood about 100 yards away, grazing near a line of cottonwood trees. Even from that distance, his presence was commanding, powerful. The afternoon sun caught his coat and turned it glossy black, and when he raised his head to look at us, I felt something shift in my chest. "He was Phil's uncle's horse," Declan explained. "Man named Jasper Morrison. Jasper was a horse trainer, one of the best. But Sorrow wasn't meant for training. Jasper called him a heart horse, the kind that chooses you, not the other way around. Problem was, Sorrow never chose anyone, After Jasper died, the family tried to sell him, brought in a trainer who used hard methods. That's when Sorrow kicked through a stall door and put a man in the hospital. Jesus. Horse has been loose in this pasture ever since. Won't let anyone within 20 feet. I feed him by tractor, dump hay at the far fence line. Vet has to tranquilize him for checkups. I stared at the stallion. Why didn't they put him down? Jasper's will specified Sorrow was to live out his natural life, no matter what. Phil inherited that responsibility, took it seriously, even if he never came out here. Sorrow pawed at the ground, still watching us. Not threatening, just aware, alert, guarded. He's lonely, I said, surprising myself. Declan looked at me sharply. What makes you say that? I don't know. I wrapped my arms around myself against the wind. That's his name, isn't it? Sorrow. Someone saw it in him. Jasper named him that as a colt. Said the horse came into the world carrying something heavy. Never saw an animal with eyes like that. We stood there in silence, watching the horse who watched us back. And somewhere in that exchange of gazes, something passed between us. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. Two broken things, standing in a Montana pasture, wondering what the hell came next. I should have gone back to Seattle. Instead, I stayed. The first week was absurd. I had no furniture except what was already there, a bed with a mattress that smelled like mothballs, a couch that sagged in the middle, a kitchen table with 3.5 chairs. I had no television, spotty internet, and a landline phone that rang exactly once. Wrong number. I went to town twice. The first time for groceries, where the woman at the checkout stared at me like I'd grown a second head when I asked where the quinoa was. They didn't have quinoa. They had canned beans and something called grit. The second time to the feed store, where I stood in front of bags of horse feed having an existential crisis while a teenager with impressive sideburns asked if I needed help. I have a horse, I said. What kind? Difficult. He grinned. Best kind. Adrio. I bought feed I didn't know how to distribute, supplements Declan had written down for me, and a pair of work gloves that felt foreign on my hands. But mostly, I watched Sorrow. Every morning I made coffee in Phil's old percolator and sat on the porch watching the sun rise over the pasture. Sorrow would be grazing, usually near the trees, and he'd raise his head when I came out. We'd stare at each other across 100 yards of grass and distance. I started talking to him. Not moving closer, just sitting there with my coffee, speaking into the wind. My husband died, I told him the third morning, and I don't know what to do with that. Everyone back home keeps saying I need to process and move through my grief like it's a tunnel with an exit sign. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm underwater, and everyone else is on the shore telling me to swim, and I don't remember how. Sorrow's ears flicked forward, listening. Probably not. But I kept talking. He kept you secret. Why would he do that? We told each other everything. At least, I thought we did. But 15 years, he paid for this place, paid Declan, set up that trust fund, and never said a word. What does that mean? What was he protecting? You? Me? Himself? The horse took a step closer. Just one, but I noticed. Declan stopped by every few days to check on me and handle the feeding since I still couldn't get near Sorrow. He'd pull up in his ancient truck, give me a long look and shake his head. "You're still here," he'd say, like it was a diagnosis. Apparently. "How long you planning to stay?" "I don't know." One evening, about 2 weeks in, Declan sat with me on the porch. We drank coffee as the sky turned pink and gold, and he told me about Jasper. He was different, Declan said. Not like other trainers. He didn't break horses. He listened to them. Said every horse had a story written in its body, in how it moved, how it reacted. His job was to read that story and help the horse write a better ending. Sounds like therapy. Maybe it was. He worked with horses other people had given up on. Abused ones, scared ones, angry ones. Sorrow was different, though. Jasper found him at a kill auction, standing in a pen with 20 other horses bound for slaughter. Said the moment he saw him, he knew this wasn't a horse that had been broken. This was a horse that refused to break. I watched Sorrow grazing in the fading light. So Jasper saved him, bought him for $300, brought him here. Spent 2 years just existing alongside him, not training, not touching, just being present. Eventually, sorrow let Jasper close, let him touch him, brush him, sit with him. They had 5 good years together before Jasper's heart gave out. Then what happened? Declan's jaw tightened. Jasper's kids didn't understand. Thought the horse should earn his keep. Brought in a trainer who used spurs and tie-downs and pain to force cooperation. Sorrow fought back. After the incident with the trainer, the family wanted him destroyed. But Jasper's will was ironclad, so they left him here and tried to forget about him. Until Phil inherited the responsibility. Yeah. Did Phil ever tell you why he finally came to visit? Declan was quiet for a long moment. He said he needed to see if something he'd been afraid of his whole life was real. The words hung between us like smoke. What was he afraid of, I asked. I don't know. He didn't explain, but when he left he looked lighter, somehow, and sadder, like he'd confirmed something he'd hoped wasn't true. After Declan left, I sat on the porch until dark, trying to make sense of it all. Phil had always been so controlled, so measured, every decision calculated, every emotion carefully managed. I'd thought it was just his personality, organized, rational, steady. Now I wondered if it had been fear. Fear of what? Failure? Vulnerability? Feeling too much? The next morning I did something stupid. I walked towards Sorrow. I made it about 30 feet before he moved. It wasn't aggressive, no charging, no rearing. He simply lifted his head, locked eyes with me, and took 3 deliberate steps backward. The message was clear: no closer. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to retreat, to respect the boundary, to remember what Declan had said about the trainer in the hospital. But I didn't move. Neither did he. We stood there in a standoff that probably lasted 30 seconds, but felt like 30 minutes. Then Sorrow snorted, tossed his head, and trotted away to the far side of the pasture. I walked back to the cabin, hands shaking, and called the one person I thought might understand what I was doing. Her name was Bridget Monroe, and she'd been my therapist for exactly 4 sessions after Phil died. I'd quit because she asked too many questions I didn't want to answer, but her card was still in my wallet. "Delia," she said when she answered, "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I'm in Montana." Pause. Montana. Phil owned property here, with a horse. "I'm staying here." Another pause, longer this time. "Okay, tell me about the horse." I told her everything, Sorrow's history, my conversations with him, the standoff that morning. When I finished, Bridget was quiet so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Delia," she finally said, "do you think you're trying to save this horse?" "I don't know. Maybe. Or are you trying to understand your husband through it?" The question landed like a stone in water, sending ripples through thoughts I hadn't fully formed. "Maybe both," I admitted. "Can I tell you what I'm hearing? You spent 22 years with a man who kept a significant part of his life hidden from you. Now he's gone and you can't ask him why. So you're standing in a pasture with a creature that also keeps itself hidden, that also refuses connection, and you're hoping that if you can reach the horse, somehow you'll understand the man." I pressed my palm against the cold window glass. "That's insane. Is it? Or is it the most sane thing you've done in months?" We talked for an hour. She didn't tell me to go back to Seattle. She didn't tell me I was deflecting my grief. She just listened. And then she said something I think about constantly. Sometimes we can't process loss directly. Sometimes we need a metaphor, a mirror, something that reflects our grief back to us in a form we can actually face. If that's what this horse is for you, then maybe you need to honor that. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and started writing. Not to Sorrow, but to Phil. "Dear Phil, I'm angry at you. I need to say that first because I haven't said it to anyone, not even myself. You died, and everyone expected me to be sad, and I am. God, I'm so sad. But I'm also furious. How could you keep this place secret? How could you come here 6 months before you died and not tell me? What were you so afraid I'd see? I'm sitting in your uncle's cabin, looking at a horse you visited once, trying to reverse engineer your heart from the clues you left behind. It's not enough. These breadcrumbs lead nowhere. I need more. I need you to tell me why you built walls I never knew existed. I loved you. I still love you. But I don't know if I knew you at all. I wrote 6 pages that night, cried into my coffee the next morning. Then I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and buried it under a rock near the fence line where sorrow grazed. Phil wasn't going to read it, but somehow, putting it in the ground here felt right. Like I was planting questions in soil that might eventually grow answers. Over the next month, I established a routine. Up at dawn, coffee on the porch, 30 minutes of talking to sorrow from a distance. Then into town for work. I'd started taking freelance design projects remotely, using the spotty internet at the library. Afternoons, I'd work on the cabin, fixing what I could. Evenings, I'd sit on the porch and watch the light change. Sorrow watched back. Slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice. The distance between us decreased, not because I pushed it, but because he allowed it. One morning he grazed 50 feet from the porch instead of 100. A week later, 40 feet, then 30. Declan noticed. He's curious about you. Or he's decided I'm not a threat. With sorrow, that's the same thing. I started reading about horses. Not training manuals, but books about horse psychology, about trauma and trust, about the way horses communicate through the subtlest shifts in body language. I learned that a horse's eye can tell you everything. The amount of white showing, the tension around the socket, the direction of focus. Sorrow's eyes were always guarded, alert, waiting for the world to prove itself dangerous again. I understood that feeling. One afternoon in early December, I was mucking out the barn. Pointless, since sorrow never went in there, but the work gave me something physical to do when I heard hoofbeats. Not running, just walking. I turned slowly. Sorrow stood at the barn entrance, 20 feet away, watching me work. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of fresh hay and the soap I'd used to clean the water troughs. His ears were forward, curious. "Hey, buddy," I said softly, not moving. "You checking out my work?" He took one step inside, then another. He'd never been in the barn since the incident with the trainer. Declan had told me that multiple times. But here he was, choosing to enter, choosing to be closer to me than he'd been to any human in 9 years. I stayed still, barely breathing, pitchfork in hand like the world's least threatening statue. Sorrow walked the perimeter of the barn, sniffing everything, checking corners, making sure there were no traps. Then he looked directly at me, held my gaze, and I saw it just for a second, the softness beneath the guard, the longing beneath the fear. "I know," I whispered. "I'm scared too." He left after 5 minutes, trotting back to his pasture like nothing had happened, but something had changed. We both knew it. That night I wrote another letter to Phil, told him about sorrow in the barn, about the way the horse's presence had made me feel less alone for the first time since the funeral. Buried it next to the first. I was building a grave of questions, hoping they might bloom into understanding. Winter came hard to Montana. By January the ground was frozen, the pasture was covered in snow that glittered like broken glass, and I'd learned to keep 3 fires going at once. The wood stove, the fireplace, and the ancient furnace that clanked ominously but delivered heat. I should have been miserable. A year ago, I would have been. But there was something clarifying about the cold, about the work, about the simple fact of survival. Every morning, I broke ice in the water troughs. Hauled hay Declan left for me. Split wood until my shoulders ached. Went to bed exhausted and woke up with purpose. And sorrow got closer. 15 feet now when I sat on the porch. Close enough that I could see the individual whiskers on his muzzle, the small scar above his left eye, the way his breath plumed white in the freezing air. We still didn't touch, but we coexisted, shared space, acknowledged each other's presence without expectation or demand. "You're doing something Jasper spent 2 years accomplishing," Declan said one morning, watching sorrow graze near the cabin while I shoveled snow off the porch. "You know that, right? I'm not doing anything. I'm just here." That's what Jasper did. Just existed alongside him. No agenda, no timeline, just presence. "Maybe sorrow and I are both tired," I said. "Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid." Declan studied me with those faded denim eyes. "What are you afraid of, Delia?" I leaned on my shovel, watching my breath fog the air. That Phil kept this secret because he was ashamed of something. About himself, about us, about his life. That our whole marriage was just surface. That I loved someone I didn't really know. "Maybe," Declan said carefully, "he kept it secret because he was protecting it. Something precious he wasn't ready to share. Then why come here right before he died? Maybe because he was finally ready. Or because he knew he was running out of time to understand it himself." We stood in the snow, two people trying to decode a dead man's heart through a damaged horse. That afternoon, I found something in the cabin I'd missed before. Behind a loose board in the bedroom closet, tucked into the wall space, was a metal box, unlocked. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Phil's precise handwriting, dated over 15 years. None of them sent, all of them addressed to Jasper. My hands shook as I read them. "Dear Uncle Jasper, I paid Declan again this month. Sorrow is healthy, according to the reports. I still haven't visited. You'd probably be disappointed in me for that, but I don't know how to face him. Every time I think about driving out there, I remember what you told me the last time we spoke. The things we fear most are usually the things we need most. I've been afraid my whole life, afraid of failure, of vulnerability, of being seen as weak. I built a career on control, married a woman who appreciated order, constructed a life that felt safe. But it's hollow, Uncle Jasper. I'm 50 years old, and I feel like I've never actually lived, just existed. You said sorrow taught you how to be present, how to stop performing and just be. I don't know if I'm capable of that, but I'm paying for his care anyway, because someone should get to live authentically, even if it's a horse I'm too cowardly to meet. Another letter dated 3 years later. Dear Uncle Jasper, Delia asked me yesterday what I was thinking about. I said nothing, which is what I always say. The truth is, I was thinking about the property, about sorrow, about the life you lived that seemed so much richer than mine, despite having so much less. You were broke most of your life, living in that cabin with horses that nobody else wanted, and you were happy, genuinely happy. I make 6 figures, live in a designer apartment, have all the markers of success, and I feel empty. How do you learn to be real when you've spent your whole life being careful? The last letter was dated 6 months ago, right before Phil's diagnosis, right before his one visit to Montana. Dear Uncle Jasper, I'm sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctor said months, not years. I'm finally coming to see sorrow. I don't know what I'm looking for. Permission, maybe? Understanding? Some sign that it's okay to have lived the way I did, even if it was the wrong way. I'm afraid of dying, but I think I'm more afraid that I never really lived, that I missed what mattered while I was busy being careful. Delia deserves better than the man I was. She deserves the truth, but I don't know how to give it to her when I barely understand it myself. I'm coming to Montana. I'm going to stand in front of that horse and see if I can finally be honest about who I am, or who I wasn't. I'm sorry I never visited before now. I was too afraid of what I might see in his eyes. Turns out I was right to be afraid. But it's time. The letter ended there. I sat on the floor of Phil's uncle's cabin, surrounded by 15 years of secret correspondence, and finally understood. Phil hadn't been keeping the property secret to hide something shameful. He'd been keeping it secret because it represented everything he wished he could be, but couldn't figure out how to become. Sorrow wasn't a burden or an obligation. He was a mirror, a living example of what Phil feared most: complete, uncompromising authenticity. Phil had spent his life performing success while feeling empty, and Sorrow had spent years refusing to perform at all, choosing isolation over submission. When Phil finally came here, 6 months before he died, he wasn't trying to fix the horse. He was trying to understand his own life through the horse's choices. I cried until the sun went down. For Phil, for his fear, for all the conversations we never had, because he didn't know how to start them. Then I walked outside into the freezing night, and Sorrow was standing at the fence, closer than he'd ever been, close enough to touch if I reached through the rails. "He came here to see you," I told the horse. "He stood where I'm standing and tried to understand why you chose this, why you'd rather be alone than pretend to be something you're not." Sorrow's ears flicked toward me. "I think he envied you," I continued, my voice cracking. "He spent his whole life being careful, being controlled, and you spent yours being free, even if freedom meant loneliness, even if it meant everyone thought you were broken." The horse took one step closer, then another. "I'm not going to try to fix you," I whispered. "I don't even know how to fix myself, but maybe we can figure out how to exist alongside each other. No expectations, no agenda, just presence." Sorrow stood 3 feet from the fence. His breath came in white clouds. His eyes, those guarded, watchful eyes, softened just slightly. And then he did something that stopped my heart. He lowered his head, just a fraction, a tiny dip that in horse language meant, "I see you, I acknowledge you. You're not a threat." I didn't move, didn't reach out, just stood there in the snow, witnessing this creature's first gesture of trust toward me. "Thank you," I breathed. He raised his head, held my gaze for another moment, then turned and walked back toward his shelter near the trees. I went inside, added wood to the fire, and wrote the last letter I would write to Phil. Not angry this time, not questioning, just grateful. "Dear Phil, I found your letters. I understand now. You were trying to figure out how to be real, and you ran out of time. I'm so sorry you felt like you had to hide that struggle from me. I'm sorry our marriage didn't feel safe enough for you to be uncertain, to be vulnerable, to be messy. But I'm learning from Sorrow what you learned standing in that pasture. That authenticity isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about showing up as you are, even when you're afraid, even when you're broken. I'm going to keep existing alongside this horse until one of us figures out what comes next. And I'm going to try to be the person you needed me to be, someone who makes space for fear and uncertainty and truth. I love you. I wish we'd had more time, but I'm grateful for what we did have, even if it wasn't everything it could have been. I'm going to try to live the way you wanted to, messily, authentically, present." I buried the letter the next morning. My own small grave of questions, finally transforming into acceptance. Spring came slowly to Montana. The snow melted grudgingly, leaving behind mud that sucked at your boots and made walking treacherous. Tiny green shoots appeared in the pasture, and the cottonwoods budded with promise. I'd been at the property for 7 months. My freelance work had grown steady. I'd winterized the cabin properly, fixed the porch, painted the interior walls a soft cream that made the space feel warmer. The barn was clean and organized, even though Sorrow still preferred sleeping outside, and Sorrow had let me touch him. It happened on a Tuesday in late March, exactly 1 year and 3 weeks after Phil died. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. I was sitting on the porch reading when Sorrow walked up, not to the fence, but directly to the porch steps, 5 feet away, closer than he'd ever voluntarily come. I set my book down slowly. "Hey, buddy." His ears were forward, curious. He stretched his neck toward me, nostrils flaring, taking in my scent with careful deliberation. I didn't move, barely breathed. Every book I'd read, every conversation with Declan, every instinct screamed the same thing. Let him choose. Don't push. Let him come to you. Sorrow took another step, then another. His muzzle was 2 feet from my hand. "I'm not going to hurt you," I whispered. "I promise." He closed the distance, pressed his soft nose against my palm. The contact lasted maybe 5 seconds, but in those 5 seconds, the entire world reorganized itself around the simple, profound miracle of trust. Then he pulled back, shook his head, and trotted away like nothing had happened. I sat there with tears streaming down my face, staring at my hand like it held the secrets of the universe. Over the next month, the touches became more frequent. He'd walk up to the porch in the mornings, let me stroke his neck, his shoulder. Never for long. He still needed space, still needed control over the interaction, but enough. Enough to build something. Declan witnessed it one morning and actually whistled low. "I'll be damned. He's teaching me," I said, running my hand along Sorrow's gleaming black coat. "About boundaries, about letting things happen in their own time. You're teaching him too, about safety." Maybe we were teaching each other. Maybe that's what connection always is, mutual education in trust. Then in early April, my mother called. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Our relationship had always been complicated, loving but distant, both of us too similar in our need for control to ever quite relax around each other. She'd been horrified when I moved to Montana, convinced I was having a breakdown. "Delia," she said, her voice tight, "I need you to come home." "Mom, I am home. I mean your real home, Seattle. Your life is here." "My life is here now." Silence. Then, "You can't stay in Montana forever. You're running away from your grief." "Actually, I'm running toward it." "That doesn't make sense." "I know, but it's true." Another long silence. "Your father and I are worried. You're isolating yourself. You're spending all your time with a horse. It's not healthy." Something in me cracked open. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. "Mom, do you know what I learned from this horse?" "I learned that sometimes isolation is a choice. A conscious decision to protect yourself until you're ready to be vulnerable again." Sorrow spent 9 years alone because everyone who came near him wanted to change him, control him, break him into something he wasn't. He chose solitude over submission. Delia and Phil spent our entire marriage isolating parts of himself because he didn't think our life together had room for his uncertainty, his fear, his messiness. He performed stability while feeling empty, and I never noticed because I was too comfortable with the performance. That's not fair to yourself. Maybe not, but it's true. And out here with this horse, I'm learning what Phil was trying to learn before he died. How to show up authentically, how to exist without performing, how to trust that vulnerability won't destroy you. My mother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You sound different." "I am different. Are you happy?" I looked out the window at Sorrow grazing in the morning light, at the mountains painted purple with distance, at the life I'd somehow stumbled into. "I'm working on it," I said. "Every day I'm working on it." After we hung up, I sat on the porch and cried. Not sad tears exactly, more like release. The permission to stop performing, even for my mother. The freedom to say, "This is my path, whether it makes sense to you or not." Sorrow walked up and pressed his forehead against my shoulder, stayed there for a solid minute, breathing with me, sharing weight. And I realized this was what Phil had been looking for. This moment. This connection, this proof that authenticity, messy, uncertain, vulnerable authenticity, could create something real. A week later, Declan arrived with unexpected news. "Got a call from a rescue organization," he said. "Woman named June who runs a therapeutic riding program for trauma survivors. She's looking for a property to expand to. Wondered if you might be interested in partnering." "Partnering how?" "You've got 40 acres. She's got horses that need space and people who need healing. She's proposing a program where participants work alongside the horses, not riding them necessarily, just being with them, learning to trust again." She heard about Sorrow. He paused. "Word gets around in horse circles. People know about the stallion nobody could touch. They know someone finally reached him." My pulse quickened. "She wants to bring people here?" "She wants to bring people who understand what it means to be afraid, to be wounded, people who need to see that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt." I thought about Phil's letters, about his desperate wish to live authentically, about Sorrow's 9-year isolation and his slow, painful journey back toward connection. "Can I meet her?" June arrived the next day. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair braided down her back and the calm, grounded presence of someone who'd done their own hard work. She walked the property with respect, touching fence posts gently, reading the land like a book. "It's perfect," she said. "Quiet, safe, room for the horses to be horses." We stood at the fence watching Sorrow graze. "Tell me about your program," I said. "We work primarily with veterans, survivors of abuse, people with PTSD. Traditional therapy helps, but there's something about horses, their presence, their honesty, their ability to mirror our emotions that reaches places talk therapy can't touch." "And you don't ride them?" "Sometimes, but mostly we just exist alongside them. Grooming, walking, sitting in their presence. Horses are prey animals. They're wired to sense danger, to read body language, to respond to authenticity. You can't fake calmness around a horse. They know. So participants learn to actually become calm, not just perform it." I understood completely. "When would you want to start?" "This summer, if you're willing." I looked at Sorrow. He raised his head, ears forward, watching us with those knowing eyes. "Will he be part of it?" I asked. "Sorrow." June smiled. "Only if he chooses to be. We never force interaction, but I imagine participants will be drawn to him. His story, his resilience. Sometimes the most wounded creatures become the best teachers." That night, I made a decision that would have terrified me a year ago. I said yes, not because I had everything figured out, not because I was fully healed, but because I'd learned from Sorrow that you don't have to be perfect to be present. You don't have to be fixed to be valuable. You just have to show up, authentically, vulnerably, with all your broken pieces still visible. The work began in June. June brought 3 horses initially, gentle, patient animals who'd been through their own traumas and emerged steady. We converted the barn into a teaching space, built additional shelters, created quiet zones where participants could sit with horses without pressure or expectation. The first group arrived in July, 8 people, ranging from a 24-year-old veteran named Harper to a 60-year-old abuse survivor named Lillian, all of them carrying wounds that didn't show on the outside. I watched them that first day, standing uncertainly in the pasture, afraid of these huge animals, unsure what they were supposed to do. June didn't instruct. She just said, "Exist alongside them. That's all. Notice what they do. Notice what you feel. Let it be okay if nothing happens." For 2 hours, the participants simply stood or sat near the horses. Some cried. Some laughed nervously. Some just breathed. And Sorrow, who I thought would stay away, walked directly into the middle of the group and stopped, stood there like a dark monument, allowing everyone to see him. Harper, the young veteran, whispered, "He's not afraid of us." "He's been hurt," I said quietly, "like you, but he's choosing to be here anyway." Something shifted in Harper's expression. Understanding, recognition. Over the following weeks, I watched miracles happen, small ones mostly. Lillian laughing for the first time in years as a mare named Georgia nuzzled her pocket looking for treats. Harper sitting in silence beside Sorrow for an entire afternoon, neither of them moving, both of them healing. And me, finding purpose in sharing what the land and the horses had given me, proof that brokenness isn't permanent, that trust can be rebuilt, that vulnerability is strength. By autumn, the program was thriving. We'd hosted 6 groups, 48 people total, and the transformation I witnessed in participants mirrored my own journey. People arrived closed, guarded, afraid. They left softer, more present, carrying hope. June became a close friend. Declan became family. The town of Willowbrook, initially skeptical of the city woman who'd taken over Jasper's property, embraced the work we were doing. And Sorrow became the heart of it all. He never forced interaction. Participants had to earn his trust, just like I had. But those who were patient, who respected his boundaries, who showed up day after day without agenda, those people eventually received his gift. A gentle nuzzle, a moment of eye contact, a willingness to share space. One afternoon, I found a note tucked into the fence post, written on notebook paper in shaky handwriting. "To whoever takes care of Sorrow, thank you. I came here broken and convinced I'd never feel safe again. This horse showed me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to trust again, slowly, on your own terms. He saved my life. So did you. Cameron." I kept that note, and everyone that came after. a bulletin board in the barn filled with testimonies from people who'd found themselves in a Montana pasture alongside damaged horses and discovered they weren't as broken as they thought. My mother visited in October. I picked her up from the tiny airport in Billings, and she stared at me like I was a stranger. "You look different," she said. "I am different." The drive to the property was silent. I could feel her worry, her judgment, her certainty that I'd made a terrible mistake. But when we arrived and she saw the barn, the horses, the mountains stretching endlessly, something in her expression softened. "Show me," she said simply. I introduced her to June, to the horses, to the participants who happened to be there that day, showed her the letters on the bulletin board, walked her through the barn where Phil's letters were now framed on the wall, his words available to anyone who needed to know that struggle and uncertainty are universal. "Did you read them?" my mother asked, standing in front of Phil's final letter. "Everyone, multiple times." "He was so afraid," she whispered. "He was human." She turned to me, tears in her eyes. "You loved him anyway." "Of course, fear doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you real." We walked out to the pasture, and Sorrow approached immediately. He'd become remarkably social in recent months, seeking out human contact rather than avoiding it. My mother gasped as he walked directly to her. "It's okay," I said. "He's curious about you. You can touch him if you want." She reached out with a trembling hand and stroked his neck. "He's beautiful. He's been through hell and chose to trust again anyway." We stood there together, 3 generations of complicated women, me, my mother, and the legacy of my marriage, finding common ground in the presence of a horse who understood that vulnerability wasn't weakness. "I'm sorry," my mother said quietly, "for not understanding, for trying to pull you back to a life that wasn't working for you anymore. You were worried. That's love. It's also control." She smiled sadly. "Apparently I'm not very good at letting go. Neither was I. Sorrow taught me how." That evening my mother sat on the porch with me watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. We drank tea and talked more honestly than we had in years. About Phil, about fear, about the ways we both performed competence to hide uncertainty. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Long term?" I'd been thinking about that question for months. Keep the program running. Expand it, maybe. Work with more people who need what this place offers. And the architecture career? I still design, but now I'm designing spaces for healing instead of commerce. June wants to build a dedicated therapy barn. We're working on plans together. My mother nodded slowly. "Your father will be relieved you're still using your education. Tell Dad I'm using everything I learned, just differently than expected." She stayed for a week. By the time I drove her back to the airport, something had shifted between us, not fixed. Healing isn't about fixing, but softer, more honest, more real. "I'm proud of you," she said at the departure gate. Those words I'd spent my life chasing through achievement and perfection, landed differently than they would have a year ago. Quieter, deeper, true. "Thank you," I said, "for seeing me." Winter approached again. My second winter in Montana. I was ready this time. Firewood stacked high, barn winterized, supplies laid in. But more than that, I was ready internally, ready for the long nights, the intense quiet, the forced introspection that winter demands. One evening in late November, I sat on the porch wrapped in Phil's old jacket, watching Sorrow stand in falling snow. He looked like a painting, dark against white, perfectly still, completely present. "We made it," I told him. "A whole year, both of us." He walked over, pressed his forehead against my chest, and we stood there, breathing together. 2 creatures who'd lost everything and somehow found each other. Who'd learned that loneliness isn't the same as solitude, that vulnerability isn't the same as weakness, that broken things can still be beautiful. "Thank you," I whispered into his mane, "for teaching me how to be real." He stayed with me until the snow stopped, then walked back to his shelter. I watched him go, feeling more at peace than I'd felt in years. Phil's letters had been right. The things we fear most are usually the things we need most. He'd feared vulnerability, authenticity, messiness, and those were exactly what he needed to feel fully alive. I'd feared irrelevance, loneliness, uncertainty, and those were exactly what led me to this mountain, this horse, this life. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what actually matters. Sometimes you have to break completely to rebuild, honestly. Sometimes the scariest thing you can do is stop performing and start existing. Sorrow taught me that. Phil's secret taught me that. Montana taught me that. And I was finally, slowly, learning the lesson. 2 years after I arrived in Montana, the therapeutic program had grown beyond anything June or I had imagined. We'd expanded to 12 horses, hosted over 200 participants, and partnered with 3 VA hospitals and 5 trauma treatment centers. But the work remained intimate. Small groups, long programs, deep healing. Sorrow remained the soul of the place. Now, 12 years old, he'd become remarkably gentle with participants, especially those carrying the heaviest wounds. It was like he could sense depth of trauma and adjusted his presence accordingly, patient with the frightened, playful with those beginning to heal, steady with those still struggling. A journalist from a national magazine came to do a story. She spent a week observing, interviewing, taking photographs. When she interviewed me, she asked, "What do you think your husband would say if he could see what you've built here?" I thought about that for a long time. I think he'd say thank you. For what? For finishing what he started, for learning the lesson he was trying to learn, for proving that vulnerability isn't something to fear. It's the only path to genuine connection. The article ran in March. Within a week, we had a waiting list of 300 people wanting to participate in the program. I had to make a choice: scale up and risk losing the intimacy that made the work effective, or stay small and turn away people who needed help. June and I talked for days. In the end, we decided to train facilitators, people who could replicate the model in other locations, not franchising exactly, but sharing the methodology, teaching others how to create spaces where humans and horses could heal together. The first training cohort arrived in May. 12 people from 7 states, all of them therapists, social workers, or horse professionals wanting to combine their skills. I stood in front of them on the first day, more nervous than I'd been in years. "I'm not an expert," I told them. "I'm just someone who showed up broken and let a horse teach me how to exist again. What I'm going to share with you isn't a technique or a protocol. It's a philosophy, presence over performance. Authenticity over agenda, trust built slowly, on the participants' terms." We spent 2 weeks together. They worked with the horses, experienced the program as participants first, then learned how to hold space for others. Many of them cried, all of them transformed. On the last day, a woman named Fiona approached me. "I came here thinking I'd learn how to work with trauma. Instead, I learned how to work with my own." "That's the only way it works," I said. "You can't guide others to vulnerability if you're still hiding from your own." After they left, I walked out to the pasture where Sorrow was grazing. The summer grass was tall and green, the sky absurdly blue. Everything felt alive. "We're teaching people now," I told him. "Your story, my story, Phil's story. All of it woven together into something that helps." He raised his head, ears forward, listening. Then he walked over and pressed his nose into my palm, a gesture that had become our greeting, our acknowledgement, our reminder that trust was possible. My phone rang. Seattle number, my accountant. "Delia, I need to talk to you about the Seattle property, your apartment. The market is hot right now, and you haven't lived there in over 2 years. Have you thought about selling?" I looked around at the mountains, the barn, the life I'd built. "Yes," I said, "sell it. I'm not going back." "You're sure?" "Completely." After I hung up, I felt lighter. That apartment had represented everything Phil and I had built together. The careful, controlled, performed life that looked successful but felt hollow. Letting it go meant accepting that chapter was over, truly over. A new chapter had begun, messier, more uncertain, but infinitely more real. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the light fade, I thought about what I'd tell Phil if he were here. I'd tell him that his fear wasn't unique, that his struggle to be authentic wasn't a failure. I'd tell him that leaving me the property was the greatest gift he could have given, not because of the land or the horse, but because it forced me to confront my own performance, my own fear, my own carefully constructed walls. I'd tell him that sorrow was okay, better than okay, that the horse he'd been too afraid to touch was now teaching others how to trust, and I'd tell him that I understood now why he kept secrets, why he struggled, why he came to Montana 6 months before he died, seeking something he couldn't name. He was looking for permission to be uncertain, to be afraid, to be vulnerable, permission to exist authentically instead of perfectly. The property gave me that permission too. Sorrow gave me that permission. And now we were giving it to others. Dozens, then hundreds of people learning what Phil learned, standing in this pasture, that brokenness isn't failure, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that the scariest thing you can do is stop performing and start living. A deer moved through the trees at the pasture's edge. Sorrow's head came up, alert but not afraid, watching, present, alive. I raised my mug of tea toward the mountains. Here's to you, Phil, and to Uncle Jasper, and to every broken thing that refuses to stay broken. Thank you for leading me here. Thank you for this life I never knew I needed. The wind carried my words away. Somewhere in that wind, I believed Phil heard them, believed he knew that his final act, leaving me this property, this horse, this possibility, had given us both what we'd been seeking all along, a chance to be real, a space to be vulnerable, permission to exist authentically, even when it's terrifying, especially when it's terrifying. So that's the story of how I inherited my late husband's property and met the horse everyone warned me about. The horse who'd been broken by cruelty and chose isolation over submission. The horse who taught me that healing isn't linear, that trust is earned in millimeters, and that the bravest thing you can do is show up as you are, scared, uncertain, imperfect, and present. Sorrow is 14 now, still magnificent, still teaching, still choosing every single day to trust despite every reason not to. I'm 53, still learning, still growing, still becoming someone I never imagined I could be. And the program, it's in 12 states now, with more launching next year. Hundreds of people finding their way back to themselves through relationships with horses who understand what it means to survive trauma. If you're watching this and you're struggling, if you feel broken or lost or convinced you'll never be whole again, I want you to know something. You're not alone, and you're not beyond healing. It just might look different than you expected. Messier, slower, more honest, but possible, always possible. Sometimes you inherit more than property. Sometimes you inherit purpose. Sometimes the thing everyone warns you about becomes the thing that saves your life. For me, it was a black stallion named Sorrow standing in a Montana pasture, teaching me that vulnerability is strength, that presence is healing, and that authenticity, raw, imperfect, uncertain authenticity, is the only thing that ever really mattered. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, leave a comment and let me know. And if you're dealing with your own sorrow, your own fear, your own grief, I hope you find your Montana, your pasture, your horse, your permission to stop performing and start living. Until next time, be gentle with yourself, and remember, broken things can still be beautiful. Sometimes they're the most beautiful things of all.